Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. The Outdoor Adventure Series celebrates individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration, stewardship, conservation, access, and enjoyment of the great outdoors. Our guest today is Dan Clouser. Dan is an author, blogger, podcast host, speaker, and consultant. Now, after running the Berkshire Baseball and Softball Club, a nonprofit sports organization he founded over 30 years ago, in 2019, Dan, his wife Sandy, and their faithful golden retriever, Euchilus, tackle RV life as they travel across the country. Dan, it's a pleasure to have you on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast.
Thanks for having me, Howard. Appreciate the opportunity.
Fantastic. Now, for our listeners, we do have the video on. And as I read the intro, I just noticed Dan is not in an RV. I'm not going to put him on the spot as to why, but I just noticed he's taken a respite for a little bit with his wife and their golden, and they're in a house, but that's okay. But Dan, again, it's a pleasure, and I found you via Podmatch, which is one of the hosting services that us podcasters use. And the magic word RV showed up. And I was really curious about how does someone set out to embark on this RV nomadic kind of lifestyle? So I'd love if you could share a little bit of your story with us.
Absolutely. So it's funny because a lot of people ask us, did my wife and I RV every weekend or were we campers? And the answer is flat out no. That was not our lifestyle at all. The first time I ever drove an RV was the day we drove ours off the lot. And the part of the inspiration came from my mom. She was kind of like well ahead of the RV curve back in the 80s. She took an old 1967 Plymouth Valiant, tore the back seat out of it and put a sheet of plywood in there and a mattress, and that became her bed. And she just traveled across the country volunteering and meeting with friends and families. And this is before the internet, so she'd just show up on somebody's doorstep and hang out for a week or a couple of weeks, whatever the case was, and was always volunteering. And after she'd stopped doing that, she graduated to a Toyota camper, but still kept volunteering. She'd go across the state of Florida and help with hurricane relief efforts. She'd help at Ground Zero. And I always loved her story, but I never envisioned that it would be my story. I was fine doing what I was doing. We were helping kids, running the youth sports organization. And then I took 2 road trips back in 2019 by myself, one from Pennsylvania to Dallas, Texas, and then down into the Sulphur Lake Charles area of Louisiana, and then back to Pennsylvania, and another one from Pennsylvania to Orlando and back. And it was the first time in my life that I really actually enjoyed the journey, where I wasn't on a strict time regiment. I stopped and visited some friends. I stopped and saw one of my old former players in Atlanta on my way to Orlando. And it it clicked. It was like, I think I just figured out why mom did this. And it was really the first time in my life that I kind of took my time, wasn't constantly on interstate highways, and literally enjoyed the journey. And when I got back after those 2 trips, I wrote like I hadn't written in years. So again, it was kind of a click, like, wow, I found this new inspiration. And I ran the idea by my wife one night when we were in our basement watching TV. I said to her, hey, what do you think if we sell all our stuff and not take a 67 Plymouth Valiant, but get an RV and travel like mom did? And she thought I'd completely lost my mind. But after some gentle nudges over the next couple months, she bought into it. And now she is in with both feet. The dog is in with 4 paws, and we are having the time of our life. We absolutely love it.
That's fantastic. Now, I'd love to circle back a little bit and unpack a little of what you just shared. So, your mom was in a 67 Plymouth Valiant. Now, you and I perhaps are within a couple years of each other. So, were you a little kid when mom decided to go out in the Plymouth Valiant, or was that pre Dan?
So it was, I was 16 years old when she
Okay.
did that. Her and my dad were divorced. I
Okay.
was living in Pennsylvania with my father. She was living in Florida.
Okay.
I had lived with my mom a little bit right after they got divorced, but then came up to Pennsylvania. So when she called me to tell me that she was doing it, again, as a 16-year-old, it wasn't something that it was just like, oh, Okay. And knowing my mom, I mean, she was kind of a little bit of a borderline hippie, so to speak.
I was gonna
Um,
say that. I was gonna say that.
it was just one of those things. And then when she stopped doing it full time, and she would call us occasionally and say, "Hey, I'm heading to the west coast of Florida for 3 weeks to volunteer with Hurricane Charlie relief efforts." So when she called us and said, "Hey, I'm going up to ground zero and working the Salvation Army tent for 3 months," which turned into 6 months, which turned into 9 months, it was like, okay, that's what mom's doing. That's just what she did. And then after she passed away, like, she going through her journals and reading about the people she met and stuff like that. That was the other thing that, as Sandy and I started to process this, why I wanted to continue podcasting and wanted to continue blogging and kind of be able to tell the stories of the people we've met and the places we've been in real time. I thought it would have been cool that if in the mid 80s, if mom would have had social media to share some of those stories as opposed to reading about them in their journals after she'd passed, would have been pretty neat for sure. So that's why I'd podcasted with our organization, but when we decided to leave and do this, podcasting was definitely something I wanted to continue to tell those stories of the people we met.
I love this, and there's some further tangents I like to go on, and but one question I do have to ask about the adventures that you shared about your mom. Did you ever go on an adventure with her when she was take on one of her journeys?
I did. So between my junior and senior year of high school, she was coming through Pennsylvania and picked me up, and we just went down the East Coast. We were having a family reunion on her side of the family in Florida, and so basically from Pennsylvania to Florida, which was a trip that I had taken many times in my life, but again, never like this, because normally it was a straight shot down I-95.
Right.
We're there in 20 hours and we're doing our thing. I don't remember for sure how long this was, but I know we did not touch I-95 one time. We stopped and saw my cousin who was in the Marines at Quantico. I remember that distinctly because my mom had this thing of, she loved to surprise people. So we show up at 7 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning in front of an officer in the Marines who I hadn't seen since I'm 16 now. I hadn't seen since I was probably 10 or 11 at the time, because he was considerably older than me. And she decides to send me up by myself to knock on his door to surprise him. And I'm like, nah, that's not happening. But like she always could, she convinced me to do it. And we had a great time with him. He took me to get a haircut. It was funny. I had a mullet at the time, and I wanted to go with more of the hairstyle I have now, a buzz cut. And he took me to where all the Marines go. And I remember walking in the door and all of the barbers looking at me, and they said, "Son, we only give one kind of haircut here." And I said, "That's okay. That's what I want right now." So all the hair came off, and I've kind of had the same style just about ever since.
That is a very cool story, and I can imagine what it was like for him opening the door and saying like, "Who is this kid?"
Yeah,
Very
and it was
cool.
funny. And my mom had never met his wife at the time. They were just recently married. He had a stepson, so never met him, but that was my mom. Like, she was just, that's what she did. She would show up. I mean, my brother was in the military. She would show up with guys that he was in the military with, just on their front door that randomly, in San Antonio or wherever she would be. And that's just what she did. She loved doing that. And it's funny because we've done that a couple different times where we've stopped and surprised some people. One of my old players, we stopped in North Carolina. I hadn't seen him for 20 years, and he's now coaching high school baseball in North Carolina. And we happened to be in a spot where he was going to be coaching a game at the same time. And we're connected on social media yet, but we hadn't physically seen each other for probably over 20 years. And to see his face when I just walked up out of the blue before the game, and he looked over at me and was like, "Dan Clouser, what are you doing in Mount Airy, North Carolina at a North Stokes baseball game?" And I'm like, "You're to watch a coach, man." And again, to see like his reaction is one of those things like, all right, I get why mom did this. Like, it's pretty cool to surprise people like that.